I never planned to fall for her. It just happened in the quiet moments, the late-night conversations, the soft smiles, the way she understood me before I ever said a word. And the night she whispered, "No one can ever know about this." I realized this wasn't just a moment. It was something we would both carry forever. I had known Elena for years, not closely, not deeply, but in that casual, familiar way that comes from spending half your teenage life in someone's living room. She was always just my friend's mom. The person who made extra pancakes on weekends, who reminded us to drink water when we came in from the heat, who had this calm, steady presence that made the house feel like a safe place to land. But that afternoon, something shifted. My friend had asked me to stop by and help him move some equipment from the garage. Simple, routine, nothing meaningful. Except he wasn't there yet. Traffic, he said. 20 minutes, maybe 30. I told him I'd wait. So I stepped inside, and there she was, standing by the window, folding laundry in slow, thoughtful movements. Sunlight fell through the curtains in a filtered, almost golden way, catching strands of her hair. It wasn't dramatic. It was just warm. Homelike. She looked up, saw me, and smiled the kind of smile that makes time slow for a second, not because it's meant to, but because of the softness in it. "Oh, Daniel. You're early," she said, her voice calm and familiar. "He'll be here soon. Sit. Let me make you tea." She said it so naturally that I didn't have to respond. I just nodded and sat on the couch, the same couch I'd sat on 100 times before. But everything felt different. Or maybe I did. She moved about the kitchen with quiet grace, not rushed, not rehearsed. There was a gentleness in the way she placed things, in the way she wiped her hands on a towel before pouring hot water. It was the kind of care that isn't performed. It just is. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed, just a moment, just a graze, but enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin, light as a whisper. She didn't draw back quickly or awkwardly. She just held my gaze for an extra heartbeat before sitting across from me. "How are you, really?" she asked. "Not how's work. Not how've you been. But how are you?" The kind of question adults rarely ask without expecting a polite, shallow answer. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I realized someone actually wanted to hear. I told her I'd been feeling tired. Lost, maybe? Like I was moving through days without knowing what for. Her eyes didn't narrow with concern or widen with surprise. They just softened, the way someone's eyes do when they understand exactly what you mean. "You're allowed to feel that," she said, voice quiet, thoughtful. "Life doesn't give answers all at once." The room felt still. Safe. She didn't try to fix anything. Didn't offer advice. She just sat with me in the silence that followed, a silence that felt warm, not heavy. And I realized it was the first time in a long time that I felt seen. Not by friends. Not by coworkers. But by her. It didn't happen all at once. There was no defining moment where either of us crossed some invisible line. It was quieter than that. Gentler. It happened in the small spaces life leaves open, in the pauses between responsibilities, in the evenings when everyone else had gone home, in the moments when conversation didn't feel like something we were creating, but something that naturally formed between us. After that afternoon, I found myself at their house more often. Not intentionally to see her, at least that's what I told myself. My friend and I still hung out, worked on small projects in the garage, or watched old movies in the living room. But there was an awareness now. A soft, careful awareness. Elena was always nearby, not imposing, not hovering. Just present. Sometimes she'd be in the kitchen cutting vegetables for dinner, the quiet rhythm of her hands steady and unhurried. Sometimes she'd be sitting in the backyard with a book, legs tucked beneath her, the wind moving softly through her hair. And every time our eyes met, there was a flicker of recognition, not of something secret, but of something shared. The first conversations were simple. Light. She would ask about work, or about books I was reading, or about whether I was sleeping enough. I answered easily, maybe more openly than I realized. But over time, the conversations deepened, naturally, the way a river deepens its own path just by continuing to move. One evening, after a small family gathering, I stepped outside for fresh air. The sky was a deep shade of blue, fading into night. The porch light glowed softly, and the sound of crickets hummed in the background. Elena came outside a moment later, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders. "Too loud in there?" she asked with a soft smile. I nodded. "Just needed a bit of quiet." She leaned against the railing a few feet away, the wood creaking quietly beneath her. For a while neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Eventually she exhaled, and her voice carried a different tone, one with truth beneath it. "You know," she said, "there are days when I feel like I'm constantly holding everything together. Work. Home. Expectations. And some days I just want someone to ask how I'm doing, and actually mean it." Her words hung in the cool air. I didn't rush to respond. Didn't try to fill the silence. I just turned toward her, meeting her eyes gently. "How are you doing?" I asked. Not polite. Not casual. Real. She looked at me then, fully. And I realized it had been a long time since someone had asked her that with genuine care. Her shoulders softened. She didn't unfold into tears. She didn't break. But she allowed herself to be human. We talked for a long time that evening. About the small heavinesses people carry but never mention. About purpose. About feeling needed, but not always understood. There was no closeness in the physical sense, no touch. But there was a closeness of knowing. It was the kind of night that felt like it was meant to hold quiet conversations. Rain had settled in, steady and soft, drumming lightly against the roof and windows. The house was dimly lit, just a warm kitchen light glowing above the table. My friend had already gone to bed, tired from work, leaving me to finish a project we'd been sorting out earlier. I should have left. It was late. But something in the silence felt grounding, like the night wanted to be unhurried. When I walked into the kitchen to rinse out my glass, I found Elena there, sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she didn't seem to be drinking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't visibly upset. But there was a stillness in her posture that felt like the moment before something fragile is spoken aloud. She looked up when she heard me, and instead of brushing away the heaviness with a polite smile, she simply exhaled and said quietly, "You can sit if you'd like." So I did. The rain was the only sound for a while. Not uncomfortable silence, just the kind where two people are gathering the courage to speak honestly. She stared into her cup, and then, without preface or build-up, she said softly, "I think somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a person. I became roles. Someone's mother. Someone's coworker. Someone's dependable friend. Someone who must be fine all the time." I didn't try to respond yet. I didn't want to interrupt something that needed space to breathe. She continued, voice steady but vulnerable, like she had held these words in her throat for months, maybe years. "I'm not unhappy," she said. "I just feel unseen. Like I could walk into a room and no one would actually look at me. Not really. Not long enough to notice if I'm tired or scared or hopeful about something." Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Not trembling, just holding on. I let the silence sit for a moment before speaking, my voice low. "I see you." The words weren't planned. They weren't dramatic. They were simply true. She looked up at me then, not with surprise, but with something softer. Something grateful, and maybe a little aching. Her eyes held mine longer than they ever had before. Not searching, recognizing. She didn't cry. She didn't break open. But her expression shifted in a way that was almost more intimate, a quiet letting down of guardedness, a lowering of walls. Then her hand moved, slow, careful, reaching across the table. Her fingertips brushed the back of my hand. It wasn't a bold touch. It was gentle, tentative, almost like a question. Warm. Soft. Human. I didn't grab her hand or shift closer. I just turned my hand slightly so her fingers rested against mine, acknowledging everything that moment meant without forcing it to be anything more. For a few seconds, we stayed like that, connected by touch light enough to lift if either of us grew afraid, but meaningful enough that neither of us wanted to. Then she withdrew her hand, not out of regret, but with the quiet understanding that the moment had spoken for itself. After that night, nothing was said out loud. No mention of the touch, no reference to the way the air had felt charged with understanding. And yet, everything between us shifted, subtly, respectfully, like the quiet deepening of a tide no one notices until the shoreline has changed. Life continued as usual on the outside. But from the inside, it felt as though we were moving more thoughtfully around each other, aware of each small exchange, the kind most people would overlook. Our conversations were still warm and ordinary. She still asked if I wanted tea. I still helped her bring groceries from the car. But it was in the spaces between these moments where the tension grew, not heavy, not overwhelming, just alive. When she laughed now, she sometimes looked toward me first, as if checking whether I'd seen the spark of humor in her eyes. When I entered a room, her posture would lift slightly, not with surprise, but with quiet presence, like she had been waiting for something that she didn't know how to name. Once, I was in the kitchen slicing fruit while she prepared dinner. Our shoulders brushed, lightly, accidentally, and neither of us moved away. Her perfume was subtle, something soft with hints of jasmine and citrus, and for a moment, the world felt very still. Not suspended, just aware. She continued chopping vegetables, but the movement of her hands slowed slightly, as though she were also feeling that closeness in the quiet center of her chest. We didn't look at each other, but we felt each other. Other moments were quieter, but heavier with meaning. One afternoon, I found her standing near the garden, watering the roses her late mother had once planted. The sun filtered through the leaves, tracing warm gold along her hair. She wasn't crying, but there was a tenderness in her gaze, a softness that felt more vulnerable than tears. I stood beside her, not touching, just close enough to share the same breath of air. She passed me the watering can without a word. Our fingers didn't brush that time, but the absence of touch seemed to speak just as loudly, as if both of us were aware of how much meaning even the smallest contact now carried. Sometimes, our eyes met and held a moment longer than ordinary courtesy required. But there was no hunger in it. No urgency. Just recognition. The kind that says, I remember what we shared. I haven't forgotten. I won't pretend it meant nothing. There were also moments of hesitation. A pause before stepping closer. A deeper breath before speaking. A glance toward the doorway, as if reminding ourselves of all the lives connected to hers, the family, the history, the expectations. This was not a reckless pull. It was careful. Tender. A love that understood the cost of being careless. Neither of us wanted to cross a boundary we couldn't return from. But neither of us could ignore the growing warmth between us, the warmth that didn't demand anything, didn't rush, didn't ask for declarations. It was early evening when the storm rolled in, the kind of heavy summer rain that makes the world feel smaller, quieter, almost sheltered. The lights flickered twice, then went out completely, leaving the house in darkness except for the dim, warm glow from a few candles on the living room shelf. My friend had left earlier to meet someone for dinner, so it was just Elena and me in the quiet house. I could hear the soft hum of rain against the windows, the occasional low rumble of thunder in the distance. It felt like the storm wasn't just outside, it was inside as well, settled in the space between us. Elena was sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up slightly, one arm resting along the cushion, the candlelight tracing soft gold across her cheekbones. I sat on the floor near the window, leaning back against the wall. Neither of us spoke right away. We didn't need to. The storm, the shadows, the soft light, it all felt like something had pulled a curtain gently back, leaving only truth on the other side. She breathed out slow. It's strange, she began, her voice quiet, steady. How life can feel full and empty at the same time. I didn't respond. I just listened, the way she always listened to me. For years, she continued. I've been surrounded by people. Family, coworkers, neighbors, yet I've felt so alone in my own thoughts. Not because anyone is unkind. Just because no one looks closely. Her eyes lifted to mine. Except you. The words didn't land like a confession. They landed like something that had been waiting to be spoken, something already true, simply acknowledged now. I moved to sit beside her slowly, making sure the space between us closed at a pace that felt safe. I didn't touch her yet. I just sat, close enough that I could feel the warmth from her body in the still air. You look at me like I'm still someone, she whispered. Like I haven't disappeared. I turned slightly toward her. Because you haven't. There was a long silence, not hesitant, not uncertain, just full. Then she leaned toward me, not all at once, but gently, resting her forehead against my chest. Her hair brushed my jaw, soft and light. I placed my hand very slowly on her back, fingers spreading over the fabric of her sweater, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. It wasn't an embrace driven by impulse. It was an embrace of recognition. Of being seen. Of being known. The rain outside softened, becoming a quiet backdrop to our stillness. She didn't cry. I didn't say anything more. The moment didn't need words. Everything was already understood in the way she let her weight settle into me, not heavily, just enough to say I trust this. I trust you. After some time, she drew in a small, steadying breath, and lifted her head just slightly, not pulling away, just enough so our faces were close, our foreheads nearly touching, our breaths mingling in the warm candlelit air. Our eyes held. No confession was spoken aloud. When the power finally returned, it was almost jarring, the sudden brightness, the quiet hum of appliances waking back to life, the familiar order of the world stepping in to replace the fragile softness the candlelight had given us. The living room didn't feel the same anymore. Neither did we. Elena sat up slowly, pulling her shawl closer around her shoulders as though she had suddenly remembered the weight of everything outside that moment. I stayed still beside her, not touching, not speaking. The closeness we had shared was still there in the air, gentle, warm, unmistakable, but now the world around us had returned, asking to be acknowledged. She didn't look at me right away. The silence wasn't cold. It was thoughtful. Heavy in a way that came not from regret, but from deep consideration. When she finally turned toward me, her eyes were soft and conflicted, not afraid, just aware. Daniel, she said quietly, my name in her voice almost sounding like an exhale. What happened just now, what we felt, we both know it wasn't small. I nodded, slow, steady. I know. She looked down at her hands for a moment, as if gathering the courage to place the next words carefully, like fragile glass. This isn't something that can be spoken about, she said. Not to anyone. Not even in passing. Her voice didn't shake, but there was a tremor of emotion underneath, the kind that comes from understanding the cost of being seen too closely. I waited. I didn't interrupt. This house, my family, my life. She paused, breath subtle and strained. People don't look at situations like this with gentleness. They look for scandal. They look to blame. They turn something human into something wrong. Her eyes lifted back to mine, steady, searching. And I won't let the peace I've built be destroyed by misunderstanding. There was no accusation in her tone. No warning. Just truth. I nodded again. Not because I had to, but because I understood. Deeply. I would never hurt you, I said softly. Her lips pressed together, not to hold back words, but to hold back emotion. She reached out, and her hand rested on my forearm, warm, gentle, familiar now. The touch wasn't a pull. It wasn't a plea. It was a thank you. When she spoke next, it was barely above a whisper. No one can ever know about this. The sentence wasn't about hiding something shameful. It was about protecting something fragile. Something real. I understood that instantly. Not everything we feel belongs to the world. Some things are meant to stay quiet, not because they are wrong, but because they are too true to survive judgment. I placed my hand lightly over hers. No pressure. No grasp. Just presence. I know. Her eyes closed for a moment, a small breath of relief, of acceptance. Then she withdrew her hand slowly, letting the space between us settle back into something calm, grounded, steady. Nothing between us was broken. Nothing was denied. But a boundary had been drawn, not to stop what we felt, but to honor it. Life didn't shift suddenly after that night. There were no dramatic changes, no secret meetings, no intense attempts to hold on to something we couldn't name out loud. Instead, everything settled into a kind of gentle knowing, the kind that lives quietly beneath your skin and surfaces only in small, meaningful ways. I still visited the house. The rhythm stayed familiar, my friend and I working in the garage, laughing over old stories, talking about our separate plans for the future. It was easy to fall back into that pattern because it was real, too. My life didn't stop, and neither did hers. And yet, whenever I saw Elena, there was a soft recognition in her expression, not hidden, not exaggerated. Just present. Sometimes it was in the way her eyes warmed slightly when she greeted me. Sometimes in the slight pause of her hand when she handed me a cup of tea. Sometimes in a shared glance when something funny was said, the two of us catching a private layer of understanding beneath the moment. There was no tension now, at least, not the kind that aches or demands. The closeness we discovered had found its place, like a photograph carefully tucked into a book, held between pages that would not let it be bent or lost. One evening, we ended up in the garden again, the same roses, the same quiet breeze moving gently through the leaves. The sun was low, painting everything in soft gold. I was about to leave, and she walked me to the gate the way she always had. We stood there for a moment, either of us in a rush to fill the space. She looked at the flowers, then at her hands, then finally at me. "What happened?" she said softly. "Was real. And I hope you know that. Even if we never speak of it directly again." I nodded. "I do." Her eyes softened, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, not bright, not wide, but deep. A smile that understood both love and restraint. "You helped me remember who I am," she said. "Not just who I'm supposed to be." The truth of that settled into me in a way I knew would last a long time. "And you helped me feel seen," I replied. There was nothing dramatic to add. No promises, no declarations, no attempts to shape the future into something it couldn't realistically be. Instead, there was acceptance, warm, respectful, whole. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, slow, steady. Her cheek rested near my shoulder, the scent of her hair familiar now in a way that would stay with me forever. I held her gently, not tightly, just enough to let her know I was still there, still grateful, still changed. When we pulled back, the moment didn't break. It simply settled. We didn't say goodbye differently than usual. Because we didn't need to. Some connections don't need to be continued to remain real. Some feelings don't need to be acted on to matter deeply. Some love is quiet, and private, and exactly enough. I walked away knowing we had not lost anything.